I'm going in blind. I've seen the headlines about things that are bad for you, but I've also heard some inkling of the scientific studies that suggest much of the nutritional information we're given is not based on hard science. It's time for The Rational View to investigate.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.
Produced by Soapbox Media.
The world needs evidence-based public policy now more than ever. Making the right decisions should not be partisan politics. Please help spread The Rational View by going to patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Together, we can make a better future. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. I'm your host, Dr. Al Scott. In this episode, I'm hoping to start a new investigation into the science behind nutrition and food science. Many of us have heard the messages from our doctors that we need to cut back on our high sodium diets and we need to avoid fat and red meat to prevent heart disease. We've been told that sugar is bad for us, processed foods are bad for us, alcohol is bad for us. We need to eat more fruit and vegetables. We need to eat more fiber. But Western society has heard these messages for some time and is now in the midst of an increasing obesity epidemic. Are we getting good nutritional advice? I want to find out what the science says. If you enjoy what you're hearing, please press like on your podcast app. Please share it with your friends and come join us on the Rational View Facebook group. We'd love to hear your opinions on these items and also any interest for new podcast directions that you'd like to share with me. Now, I don't have much background knowledge on the topic of food science, and that's why I've stayed somewhat away from it, but I come at this like hopefully a lot of you do. We can learn together. I'm going in blind. I've seen the headlines about things that are bad for you, but I've also heard some inkling of the scientific studies that suggest much of the nutritional information we're given is not based on hard science. It's time for The Rational View to investigate. I'm sure you've all heard of, say, the Atkins diet, where you just eat red meat and lose weight. But that does seem to go against the philosophy of cutting back on red meat and fat for heart disease and cholesterol problems. I want to go through what some of my initial understandings are on some of these topics that I want to tackle in follow-on podcasts. And maybe we can understand a little bit about where I'm going to be coming from on these as my initial hypothesis, and we'll see if we can test these hypotheses with the experts and see if they stand up to the scientists. So, sugar. The body needs sugar to live. It's not something that we should try to avoid. And I try to avoid artificial sweeteners in colas. I also try to moderate my sugar intake, except around Christmas, which has been a problem with me. I've heard aspartame can cause cancer, and I've heard that sucralose can cause anal leakage. These are things I'd like to avoid. I haven't verified any of that, but I've also heard that people who drink sugar-free soda do not in general lose weight. In fact, I think there was a study recently that showed that people that drink that tend to gain weight. But maybe it's due to another factor. Maybe it's not a strong study. Maybe there are confounding factors in these studies that may have led to this. So I want to investigate sugar. I want to investigate salt. Food manufacturers, as far as I've known, have been under a lot of pressure to reduce the sodium content of their processed food. Some of those dried noodle soups, if you go to the grocery store and look at the label, they have truly horrific salt concentrations. And if you look at, percentage of your daily intake, that they actually will write, half a packet is 100% of your daily intake. You have to look at what volume they specify on the label and figure out, okay, well, I'm going to eat the whole thing. Oh, no. Well, it's very difficult to find a single serving of soup with less than, say, 35% of your daily sodium allowance. So I want to ask the questions. Is your daily sodium allowance based on good science? After years of searching for these soups, I've come across more recent research that calls into question the need to limit sodium intake. I've read that the data that's saying sodium is bad for you is all taken from people who already have problems, who are already high blood pressure or have had heart attacks. So yes, sodium is bad for these people at risk, but is it bad for the general healthy population? I want to dig into the science and find the truth about salt. Another one, fat, similar to salt. I've heard the research saying that fat is bad for you is rather sparse. Fat has a high concentration of calories, so it was thought to be bad for you just because too much fat is too much calories. But what researchers have found out, I believe, is that fat limits your appetite. And this is the root of the Atkins diet, for example. If you go to the grocery store and buy the low-fat versions of any food product, like sour cream, for example, the manufacturers tend to increase the sodium to compensate for the loss of flavor. So which is better, low-fat, high-sodium, or high-sodium, low-fat? Cholesterol buildup in your arteries is a known cause of heart attacks. Does eating foods high in cholesterol lead to buildup of cholesterol in the bloodstream? How does the food get from your mouth to your stomach to your blood? Doesn't the stomach break down all of the cholesterol? My understanding is that the cells in your body manufacture the cholesterol that ends up in your bloodstream and causes hardening of the arteries. So I'm a bit skeptical of cutting back on cholesterol, for example, as a food product. Maybe there's a connection. Obviously, if you have the raw products to make cholesterol, maybe your body makes more of it. But I also think that it's probably genetic, that you get cholesterol buildup in your bloodstream from the basic proteins that you eat that are manufactured by your cells into cholesterol in your blood. What I do know about fats in terms of the research is that trans fats are implicated in heart disease. There's been, I think, strong studies that trans fatty acids, which are made from hydrogenated vegetable oil, if you look at the recipe or the label of margarine, it's hydrogenated vegetable oil. It's a source of trans fats. It's a source of heart disease. So my feeling from my background, my very superficial 100-foot view, is that butter is better than margarine and nuts are better still. So, the types of fats that you get are important. And it's not necessarily bad to have too much red meat, but we have to talk about the science and talk to the scientists on this. So I'm hoping to interview people who know something about this, who can help us out. Here's the next one, near and dear to my heart: alcohol. Recently, the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction issued new guidelines for the healthy use of alcohol, cutting their 2011 healthy limit of 15 drinks a week down to 2 drinks a week, in a move reminiscent of the linear no-threshold theory of radiation. I guess I'm not too surprised, but let's say I'm not too happy with these new guidelines. So I'd love to interview someone who could tell us what the science says on alcohol, and is every drop of alcohol bad for you? Another thing that I've heard, of course, and you've probably heard too, is that, a couple drinks of wine are good for you. The Mediterranean diet actually extends your life. There's been a lot of controversy over this. And I don't know if it's coming from good science or if it's coming from, a slippery slope type of argument that people are trying to keep people away from having alcohol entirely because it's a slippery slope to addiction. So these are all interesting arguments. I want to dig into this and figure out where the science actually leads us. Other topics I want to investigate: organic farming. Is food grown through organic farming processes more nutritious than food produced using traditional farming practices? And what about genetically modified organisms? Are they dangerous and unhealthy, or are they enabling us to feed people more efficiently? Now, I had an earlier podcast on GMOs, and my conclusion of that was that GMOs are not inherently dangerous and are actually probably saving a lot of lives by making food easier to produce with fewer pesticides. And if you look at my position on organic farming, it would be that organic farming, yes, it does probably in most cases produce use less pesticides, but it also takes more land to make the same volume of food. So we have to weigh the pros and cons of this thing. It's more expensive for a reason. because it's more difficult to produce. It takes more land. It takes more labor. So something I may dig into. I'll be trying to line up some interviews. Other ideas, detoxes. If you've ever heard of people pushing detox programs, I flat out don't believe that nutritional supplements and diets will detox our bodies. First, convince me that there are toxins that we need to get rid of that are not being eliminated naturally. We have an organ that eliminates toxins. It's called the liver. If your liver isn't working, you've got bigger problems than needing an herbal detox. So I'm somewhat skeptical on these. Maybe we'll find out something together. Antioxidants. Here's another nutritional chemical. People push various nutritional supplements with antioxidant properties. You've probably heard of these things. So I understand the chemistry of antioxidants. They're meant to bind up free radicals. Free radicals are highly reactive chemicals that can cause damage. They call it oxidative damage to our cells. They break down, they react with compounds in our bodies and break down our cells. They create damage. One of the biggest sources of free radicals in our lives is oxygen. Oxygen is a very reactive compound that we need to live, but we take it into our body, it breaks down, it oxidizes things, it ages us effectively. And antioxidants are supposed to, counteract the damage of breathing, which causes us to age. So from my limited knowledge, I believe that antioxidants bind up free radicals in our body and are supposed to mitigate the damage of living somewhat. My understanding is that vegetables are a good source of antioxidants. This is a very low-level understanding. So, I'm kind of going into this with some basic chemistry, some basic biology, and I'd like to understand whether the science says that eating antioxidants can help us live more healthy, can help us live longer. Is it good to interfere with these processes that have built up over time in our bodies to through evolution? Obviously, some of these interferences help us and some don't. And what we need science for is to tell us the difference. This leads into vitamins and health supplements. First, a caveat, I don't really know what vitamins are, chemically speaking. I've never covered that in high school science as far as I remember. What do I know? I know we need vitamin C to prevent scurvy. We need vitamin D to prevent seasonal affective disorder up here in the northern hemisphere in our long, dark winters. Vitamin D is manufactured in our bodies through sunlight, where we photosynthesize vitamin D in some way. So I don't think we have any health recommendations to take supplements except vitamin D for our health. Although women who want to get pregnant should be taking folic acid for brain health of the infant, as we should be getting everything else from our diets, unless, of course, we're on a long sea voyage, in which case you do want to have vitamin C for the sea. This actually leads to a story that I read recently about why British sailors were called limeys. Citrus was found to cure scurvy in the mid-18th century, which was a problem. People on long sea voyages, their teeth would fall out, they would get sick and die. So the British Navy found that loading ships with lemons and limes prevented scurvy amongst the crew. So they had a daily ration of citrus juice that they would drink and the American sailors called them limeys because of this. And I read an article recently. It was talking about the Scott expedition, the doomed Scott expedition to the South Pole, to Antarctica. And they may have fallen victim to scurvy in the early 1900s, the early 20th century of all times. It took until the early 20th century to realize that vitamin C was the component of the lemons and limes that treated scurvy. The reason they found this out was that originally they had lemons and limes in the ships, but over time, when they started colonizing the West Indies, they found out that limes from the West Indies were very easy to source. So they started using these limes from the West Indies to try to treat scurvy. But limes are actually much lower in vitamin C than lemons or oranges, and it turns out that they weren't giving out enough vitamin C to fend off scurvy. So it actually there was an upswing of scurvy on ships in the 19th through the 19th century, because they didn't know what aspect of these citrus fruits was preventative. They thought maybe it was the acid, and it was one of the acids. It was the citric acid, but it wasn't just acid. So people would use vinegar as a cure. They had all sorts of different things. So it wasn't until like 1919 that they realized that it was the vitamin C component that fended off scurvy. Other vitamin anecdotes, I find personally that vitamin B, for example, helps me to sleep better. I'm very curious to find out what the science says on some of these vitamin supplements. I know just taking them is not recommended by most doctors. So this is an interesting scientific evidence question that I'd like to pursue. So these are some of the questions that I've thought of that I want us to discuss. I'm going to be lining up interviews. Come post on my Facebook group or tag me in a tweet with your food science and nutrition questions or suggestions for guests. Which of these topics are you most interested in? I'm going to get these interviews together over coming weeks and try to shine a light on this confusing topic. Let's put to bed some myths and get a rational view on nutrition and food.
If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Thanks for listening.